So at this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Rae Stonehouse, and just give you a little overview of his presentation. So, are you an idea person? Do you have the skills to turn your ideas into reality? Do you have the time, energy, resources, and finances to make your idea happen? Mary Kay Ash said, "Ideas are a dime a dozen. People who implement them are priceless." Sometimes, no, let's change that to most of the time, to make things happen, you have to involve other people. People with the money, the resources, the time, and the energy to make things happen. Our presenter, Rae Stonehouse, shares sage advice on how to leverage your knowledge and experience, channel your passion, build your personal influence, and how to speak to make things happen. Please welcome Rae Stonehouse with The Power of Influence, Speaking to Make Things Happen.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. A little more energetic than that. Come on. Good morning. But the more energy you have, the better I am, the more energy that I have. I've heard it said many times that there are at least two types of people in this world. There are destination people and there are journey people. Now, I would expect that many of you in this room are destination people. By show of hands, who is a student or an engineer wannabe? Any students in the room? Only one? Okay, well, I'll talk to you specifically. As an engineer wannabe, I would expect that as a destination, what you have in mind is graduating from school, getting your degree. Now, you've told me you have to go out and get some more education. But what the destination is in your mind is that job where you're out there being an engineer. That's true. And now, if there's only one student, is that to say that everybody else in this room is an engineer? No? Am I in the wrong group? Is this young engineers?
Sort of. Some of us are engineers in training.
Well, how's the difference between an engineer in training and a student?
We're working, but we just don't get paid quite as well.
Oh, slavery. So that's called slavery, isn't it? Okay, well, so how many are engineers in training? Put it that way, show of hands. Quite a few people. Okay, so your destination, I would expect, is very similar to the student, where there's a point in time where you will complete your course, and you will get paid. You will be bona fide engineers. That's your destination. That's what you have in mind. Now I look around, and I'm seeing there are a couple other individuals here that are closer to my age bracket. Can't use the term young on us. Destination. You've already graduated, I assume? So do you have a destination? Is retirement the goal, or is it bigger and better projects?
Bigger and better projects.
Bigger, better projects. I thought that there was actually going to be a lot more engineers that are working in their field right now. Because what I would say, the destination for somebody working as an engineer, my understanding of engineering, is being involved with major projects. So they could either be a project leader, a team leader, or working on a project, and the destination is a set of deliverables and is a goal. The project will be completed by such and such a time. That's my understanding of what engineers would do, be project manager. That would be the destination. Now I'm not a destination person. I've always been a journey person. Always been. I think back to when I was a young man, I was taking a program, postgraduate program in psychiatric nursing. I'm a registered nurse and I work in psychiatry. I was being trained to be a mental health therapist. And I was really reluctant to take the program on in the first place because it was a really bad time for me. I had lost a close friend. He was killed in a car accident. And it was very tragic because I was involved with the family. So I really didn't want to get involved with a course that was going to basically play with my emotions. I didn't want to get involved with that. And yet I was persuaded to taking that course. Well, as we drew towards the end of the course, my instructors, Karen and Lynn, they were talking about graduation and what it would be like when we're graduating. And for whatever reason, I think they're just trying to get my goat. They said, "Rae, we don't know if you're going to graduate or not." and they're trying to play with my head. And I thought that was really weird, considering they're teaching me to be a therapist, and that seemed a little bit odd. And I think I surprised them, because I said, I don't really care if I graduate or not, because it's not important. You're going to give me a certificate at the end of it. I have lots of certificates on my wall. They don't guarantee me any more pay. They don't guarantee me a better job. But what I'm more interested in is the journey that I've been on. I'm not the same man at the end of this program as I was that I started. I've learned things throughout that if I get a certificate, it does not matter to me at all. I've learned things. It's been almost 35 years since I've taken that program. I probably still have that piece of paper and I could photocopy it for a resume if I needed it, but there was no real value to it. Yet what I learned on that journey, I probably use every day in my life and in my working practice. I still work in psychiatry and mental health. So while I don't do therapizing, I call it, I don't do that every day, the skills and techniques I learned in that course, I still use. So I'm a journey person. My destination for this particular presentation was to put together about an hour-long presentation for a group of engineers. That was my deliverables, and to be out of here in less than an hour. Because if I'm here after the hour, I'm probably going to be talking to the Capri hotel staff, and, well, I don't know how receptive they will be to this topic. In researching this topic, Power of Influence, speaking to make things happen, I found that I was on the wrong journey. This really wasn't the way to look at things. The power of influence. When I researched it, I found that one of the challenges that the word persuasion and influence are used interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing. So here I am creating a presentation on a subject that really wasn't the one that I needed to be presenting here. I also found out that on the subject of persuasion, there are facilitators in the US that have 3- and 4-day workshops for $5,000 US on the subject of persuasion. But that's almost, what, $1 million Canadian? The way the exchange is right now. So I realized I was in the wrong area for a speech. So I've never done this before. I actually changed the speech. I changed the direction of it. So I like a little bit of a drum roll. This is pretty exciting, so nice big drum roll. Okay, ready? Here we go. Okay. The power of persuasion, speaking to make things happen. Okay, a little anticlimactic, but it's good to build up a little bit of drama in your presentation. When I researched influence and persuasion, the way I like to do presentations, I call it the onion approach. I take a look at the onion from the outside, and I look at it from different directions, the subject. I take a layer off of it, peel it back a little bit, and explore a little bit more, perhaps go back. I call that the onion approach. I hope you find it appealing. That's the correct response. Ooh, hopefully that'll be the only pun. In my research, I found a woman named Nicole DeFalco. I haven't got a clue who she is, but she created an interesting blog where she explored the subject of persuasion. And her definition of it is presenting a case in such a way as to sway the opinion of others, make people believe certain information, or motivate a decision. So the gist of this presentation was speaking so you can make things happen. While influence is important, touch on a little bit in the future here, persuasion is really how you make things happen. You get people to do things by persuading them. Now, on the other hand, she's talking about influence. She says influence is having a vision of the optimum outcome for a situation or organization, and then without using force or coercion, motivating people to work together toward making a vision a reality. So influence is more at an upper level. It's more of a leadership level, getting other people to do what you want them to do. We break it down a little bit, just trying to get this out of the way. So persuasion, choosing words and phrases to communicate ideas to strike a responsive chord in a target audience. We've grown up, all of us, in a persuasive world. We're bombarded, they say, with some 3,500 persuasive messages every single day, whether it be from the advertising world, promotion world, somebody trying to get us to do something. We're bombarded with that. You can see it even listening to the advertisements. They target market. If you're age 55 years and older and you own your own house, you might have seen that one, you probably don't focus on it, you're not 55 years or older, but they tell you, they put the element of fear. They set it up so that you listen to it from that point on. So they're striking a responsive chord in that target audience, age 55 years and older. Using a decision matrix to steer a conversation through a path of predictive choices. Do you use algorithms in engineering? Do you somewhat familiar with the concept? Have you ever answered the phone at supper time? Pick it up. Hello, my name is, and it's a telemarketer? A telemarketer, you can guarantee that they are using a decision matrix. They are taking you through a series of questions that it doesn't matter what your response is, they have another one to go to. I had this live in my house last week. My son was sitting up front and he told me there's somebody who wanted to see me. I go up, there's a young fellow selling a security system for my house. He says, I don't know if you noticed, sir, but all the houses in your area have this little orange card. Well, I hadn't noticed, but even if I had said yes, he had an answer for that. If I said no, well, this is what I'm going to talk about. I am selling a home security system that won't cost you a penny. Well, I'm sorry, I don't have any money. No, sir, it won't cost you any money. So it didn't matter what I said, he would take me in another route. He had another answer. I finally had to pull out my heavy-duty stopper. Sorry, my rule is, under no circumstances do I deal with door-to-door salesperson. Well, why is that, sir? Because I've been taken advantage of every single time, and I will no longer do that. Have a good day. And I left and I went into the house. That's a decision matrix. So they are trying to do is they are trying to persuade you through a series of questions so that you lead to positive response on their side. And when I did check it out online, it wasn't good. The equipment was free. All it would do was cost me $2,800 over the next 3 months or 3 years for monthly payments. Orchestrating environmental conditions to which interact with each other, with others, in order to optimize the likelihood of desirable outcome. Every single one of us has been exposed to this. You ever go grocery shopping? Think of this as the grocery store. All the vital things that you need in life are on the perimeter. You may have your bake shop over here, you've got your dairy over here, you've got your vegetables, and you've got your meat. If you're living by just what you need for the essentials, you can do the perimeter, you're out in 10 minutes. You're good to go. But what do? They make aisles. And on the aisles, they fill it up with nice to have stuff or impulse buying items. So it's like a rat's maze. You go up and down and you're exposed to things that you didn't even know that you needed until you saw it. Especially if you're hungry, you really needed it. It's amazing that they let two-way traffic go on these, because I can just see them. The whole intent is to draw you past, expose you past different aisles so that you're forced into buying and spending money at their business. Now what happens when you come up to the cashier? What do you see beside you when you're waiting to buy your goods, pay for your goods? Chocolates, candies, all the impulse things. And they're all at the level of young children. All the temper tantrums I've seen in life. They're probably at a grocery store when the mom said, no, you can't have that. So this is an example of orchestrating an environmental, persuading you into buying something. Now back to influence again. Influence is one of the defining attributes of leaders. Great leaders seldom need to persuade, they only need to explain. Higher level persuasion is a little bit different. They have a reputation, they have experience. They don't need to convince people, they just need to explain why it's important to do. I found this also on that webpage. Influence is about people. It's an acronym. Powerful everyday opportunities to persuade that are lasting and ethical. I think there's a whole presentation to be done specifically on influence, but I think to be influential, you have to be further into your career. Any career, not just engineering, but any career. To be influential, you have to be self-confident, you have to be experienced in your profession, you have to build a reputation of quality, you have to build a network of people. To be able to influence people, you have to know people that you can influence. So that's why I've changed the focus to this, to persuasion. But to be able to understand persuasion, you really have to understand what influence is. Now, whereas persuasion can be effectively used by anyone with a good enough story to tell, influence can only be used by leaders. We quite often see celebrities, movie stars, entertainers get behind a social cause, whether it's save the saber-toothed tigers, save the lions, save the whales. They can persuade you, but they can't necessarily influence you. They have the experience, they have the self-confidence, and they can talk you into doing something. Only by leaders, when I think of leaders that were able to influence people without having to persuade, I think of people like Mahatma Gandhi in India, who through peaceful, I don't think revolution's a good word, but a peaceful movement was able to topple the British government for self-government. Mother Teresa, working third world countries in poverty. She didn't get out there and give great speeches. She did it passively. She influenced people. As I said, we've been exposed to some 3,500 messages a day. And it started at birth. I think back to when I was young, you had to try and persuade people to get what you wanted. I can remember, probably about 6 or 7 years old, crying almost to convince my parents that I needed to watch a show that was on at 7 o'clock on the television. Well, the problem was, this is back in the days, the houses only had one television. Can you imagine that? This is way back in the olden days. And the parents had the control of the TV set. So there's no way, it didn't matter what I was going to say, I was never going to be able to watch that show that they were watching at the same time. Only one television set. This is back in the days there was only one bathroom in the house too. This is really the olden days. Then I can remember persuasion being used by my father. Father, mother, 5 kids, Volkswagen Beetle. Sunday drive. You can imagine all age of kids, it was quite chaotic. My father would persuade us, if you are all behaved, we'll stop off at the Dairy Queen and we'll get you an ice cream cone. So that was persuasion, then it was bribery in some sense. So of course we're going to be quiet because we wanted that cone. This is back in the days that you could get a cone for a nickel. They're called nickel cones, they were very tiny. Nowadays, it's probably a taster at other ice cream stores. So I learned that if I was good, I'd get something at the Dairy Queen. Now as an adult, I have an ice cream addiction. I can't go by the Dairy Queen without stopping in to get something because I'm good. I'm a good boy. I deserve to have ice cream. Now I'm type 2 diabetic, thanks Dad. As I said, we're bombarded with persuasion everywhere. We need to take a look at persuasion from why it exists, because it works. That's why it's out there. So if you're going to convince somebody to do something that you want, you have to know the rules or the way to be persuasive. And the marketing and advertising world is so pervasive in our world because it works. Not all the time though, because we're bombarded with advertising, we're bombarded with persuasive appeals. Sometimes we weed them out, sometimes we look at them thinking, I don't get it. Sometimes messages are put out there and you got to wonder, what were they thinking? So to be able to understand how to use persuasiveness, you have to realize when you are being persuaded, you're trying to do something against your will. Like in the example of the grocery store, that's all subliminal. Put the candy at that level so you have an urge when you go out. Being aware. As an example, what's the message? Are they advertising something? Are they trying to persuade us or something? It seems purposeless. Don't touch the sign. Why put the sign up? I guess there's a message there. I'm not sure if it's a joke or not. We watch television. We listen to the radio. Right around meal times, you ever notice there's an awful lot of commercials for fast foods? You probably weren't even hungry. You didn't even realize that it was mealtime. All of a sudden these advertisements come on. You start drooling. You start getting hungry because they've set it in your mind. They've triggered something subliminal. They're getting you hungry. You see the commercials. You also see them on the side of the road. So if you saw this on the side of the road, would that sign persuade you to stop in and eat at the restaurant? Just hands up for yes. Nobody? I would. I'd be curious. I'd go in at least once because obviously they've got a sense of humor. I'd go into a restaurant. I'll check a restaurant out once. If I don't like it, if the food's no good, I won't go back again and I won't recommend it. So they're using a sense of humor to draw people in. What else can they say? Yeah, we've got good food. No, another restaurant tried the same thing. Now, would you eat at this restaurant? I don't think I would. Certainly not. Yes, a sense of humor, but it sets up the element of doubt that they're persuading you, but not necessarily in the way you want it to go. There's so much messages out there. We have to filter them out. Some of them are legitimate. Nothing wrong with in business. We're all in business. We may not be the business owners, but we work for a business. The business are created to make money. Business makes money, we get paid. So those are all legitimate. Businesses have to advertise. Businesses have to promote. That's a perfectly normal way of doing things. However, there are people out there, sometimes they're unscrupulous, sometimes they're not. There are powerful lobbyist organizations out there where they have some very experienced speakers that they make a large amount of money, and their task is to convince people, to persuade them to make decisions in their behalf. A couple examples that I can think of, kind of related to my healthcare background. Back about a decade or so, I think most of us are familiar with the Canada Food Guide. You ever heard of it? Did you follow it? Could you quote some of the levels on it? Back about a decade ago, they wanted to make some changes to it. They wanted to add tofu as an upper level protein substitute, which, if you like tofu, it is a protein substitute. It's not a meat substitute, it's awful. I'm not a proponent of tofu, but many people are. And they wanted to have it posted on the food guide. But what happened was, lobbyists from the beef industry said, no way, we want to be up there, beef, and you should be having beef 5 to 6 times a week. Was it based on science? No. It was based strictly on economics. They wanted beef up there as another way to advertise their product. If it's in the Canada Food Guide, and it says you're supposed to have it 4 to 6 times a week, you're going to buy more beef. That's what the purpose of it was. So that's an example of a lobbyist. Now there's even a more ludicrous one. In the American version, they have what's called a food pyramid. And the bottom foods are foods that you should have on a daily basis, like your grains and your starches. And you work your way up. Well, as towards the top of the level, they have vegetables. Well, a very powerful tomato growers lobbyist group wanted to get ketchup designated as an essential food, so that you had to have ketchup every day. It never went through, but that just shows how lobbyists get out there and try and persuade. You know, there's lobbyists everywhere. Every level of government, there's lobbyists trying to promote somebody else's interest. So when something happens, you have to wonder, you know, the saying is, you know, you're wondering about something, is follow the money. Who benefits from this decision? You see a decision made in government, you got to go, you know, what's going on here? And I just got bacon, because I don't know if this is a real group or not, but I think it's a powerful lobbyist group for bacon lovers. We can rally behind it. You know, eat bacon. I'm finding more and more things. And what they do, these lobbyist groups, they'll come up with a persuasive argument. Well, there's an argument there, save the plants. And they'll come up with a fact to prove the point. You know, that's true. Bacon is much healthier. You got to wonder what the other 17 facts were. So bacon, the healthier choice. So as I say, there's powerful lobby groups out there trying to persuade. So persuasion is everywhere. We're going to look at in the next part is how persuasion works, how we can use it in persuasive appeals so that we're aware of what people are trying to persuade, how people are trying to persuade us. Now we're looking at how we can persuade other people. So this is a typical scenario, and I'm thinking from engineers. Does this sound familiar? Day one, maybe engineering school, problem, calls, and solution. Okay, so you isolate the problem. If you're going to ask for help for something, you're going to persuade somebody to do something, you have to know what the problem is. You have to be able to expand upon it and maybe even put it into other people's words so that they can understand it. You have to also identify the causes. Now this process, use, like I said, we use it in engineering. We also use it in nursing. We have the nursing process. We give somebody, if they have a problem, we give them a nursing diagnosis, not a medical diagnosis, because we're not doctors. We give them a nursing diagnosis. So it could be inadequate coping skills. That would be a nursing diagnosis. The next part is we identify the causes. So we would say, as seen by excessive drinking, excessive gambling, excessive online web use. So we've identified the causes. And we would say related to. The third part of it is you create workable solutions. So you're making a presentation to somebody to persuade them, this is what you're doing. This is a very quick overview. You're isolating the problem, identifying the cause, and coming up with your solutions that you want to sell them on. So we're going to take a look at the content of persuasion. Logos, pathos, and ethos. Three Musketeers? Everybody recognize those names? No, not Three Musketeers. And they're not any of the elves from Lord of the Rings either. Those look like elf names. Anybody ever heard of Aristotle? 4th century, Greece. Wrote a book called On Rhetoric. Anybody read it? Good, because I was hoping you weren't going to ask me any questions. He identified 3 different elements of a persuasive speech that I'm thinking this is probably one of the most quoted books in history that nobody's ever read. Everybody seems to know this portion of it. So let's break it down into logos. You're having a persuasive discussion. You're trying to convince somebody to do something. You need to speak with logic. That's the logos part of it. What's showing in this graphic here is a series of columns. The columns are helping support a roof or ceiling, whatever is up there, an upper structure. You could take one of those pillars away, likely it would still hold the structure. You could probably take 2 or 3 strategically placed away, or taken away, and the structure, the roof would still hold up. Now when you're coming up with an argument, you want to come up with 5 or 6, depending on the depth of the subject, of how complicated it is, you may want to come up with at least 5 or 6 different points that support your argument. Because whatever happens, doesn't matter how large the group of people you're speaking to, there will always be somebody that disagrees with you, maybe on 1 or 2 points. So if you have 1 or 2 points that they disagree with, and they're taken away, your logic, your argument should still be strong enough to support your main theme. The second part is speaking to the heart, pathos. Now back in Aristotle's time, they felt that the heart was also your soul. They didn't think of it as an organ, a mechanical pump that pumped blood through your circulatory system. They thought it as the soul of your essence. And yet, even though we know nowadays that the heart is a pump, we still think of the heart as where you want to speak to. When you're giving a persuasive speech to people, you want to have a logical argument to back yourself up, but you want to be able to connect with the person that you're trying to get the message to. You want to speak to them at a one-to-one level. You want to speak heart to heart. You've heard that expression, they resonated with me? That's really what that's about. I've listened to thousands of speeches. I've evaluated probably thousands of speeches. And I've given the evaluation to some speakers that weren't very good. But they resonated with me. The message that they had was good. They didn't have the skills of public speaking. They weren't outgoing. They really didn't engage the audience. But the message they had, they came from the heart. And that was really important. And I congratulated them on that, and encouraged them to go to the next level of public speaking, becoming more proficient. So speaking to the heart. If you come from a sales background, it's said that people make their decision to buy something based on emotion. So that's from the heart. They back up their decision or justify it from the logos, from the logic. If they like something, they'll buy it because they like it. It really feels good to them. They will buy it, and they bought it because, oh, it gets so many. If it's a car, so many miles per gallon. It's comes in this. They will justify it logically. Then speak from authority. The classic example I think of this one is I was following. This is a decade or so back. There was a big discussion in the newspaper, letters to the editor about the use of fluoride in public water system. And there was a very loud individual out of Summerland that was speaking against it. And all kinds of research he was pointing out, and he was pontificating on it, and you can't do this, and he was going to public forums. Yet his degree, he was a PhD in geography. And I'm thinking, okay, obviously a learned man, he's gone to school, has a degree, but what gives him any credibility to talk about the subject of fluoride in the water? That was an example. So that undermined anything that he had to say. Maybe he had some good points, but that took away from him. So when you're trying to persuade somebody, you want to be able to have the credentials and the knowledge to be able to speak on the particular subject. I'm speaking here today based on the fact that I have practiced public speaking and I know something about it. So I've got a little bit of credibility there. I'm not an expert, but it's consistent with what message I'm trying to deliver today. Now here's some quick tips for, how's your time anyways?
8:35.
Okay. Quick tips for crafting a persuasive speech. I think there's about 4 or 5 tips here. You should be telling a story. Stories are important for sales. And the story should have you involved in there in some way. It could be a story with somebody that you know, but there has to be, a story has to have a beginning, there has to be a content to the story, and there has to be a conclusion. And it has to be applicable to the message that you're trying to get across. Many public speakers stand up and start off by telling a joke. And then they go into something else. The joke had no reference or no connection. So that was a waste. It had nothing to do with what they're talking about. The story that you come up with should tie into your speech. If you're talking about perhaps world famine, maybe you want to talk, you see the commercials. Kids come up with the great big large eyes, and they, this person hasn't eaten in 3 days. So they tell a story. And they're trying to, they pull in the logos, speaking from logic, the ethos, they're pulling at your heartstrings, they're telling a story. So all those factors should come into your story. Exaggerate. Now this one gave me a little bit of a challenge, because I totally took it in the wrong direction. Well, if you're telling a joke, exaggerating is perfectly normal. I was out fishing the other day and I got a fish that was this long. So you're exaggerating. If you're telling a tall tale, fishing tale or whatever, it's okay to exaggerate. If you're in a court of law and you've been told to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth, exaggerating is not a time to do it. I was thinking of an example. Some have been around for a while, might recognize the name, Hetty Fry. Recognize that name? She was a politician, and I'm not too sure exactly if she was federal or provincial, but she made a statement. She was involved with multiculturalism, and the point that she wanted to make, she was trying to persuade people in the government that racism and discrimination was still quite prevalent in Canada. And she made a statement saying, they're burning crosses right now on the lawns of Prince George. And everybody was in a state of shock. Because if you know the reference burning crosses, if you're not familiar with it, it refers to the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. That's what they do. They would burn crosses to intimidate people. So people started digging a little deeper, and they found that the KKK does not really have a big presence in Canada. There are a couple chapters of it, but not in BC. Furthermore, there were no crosses being burnt in Prince George. She had exaggerated upon the point. She said, well, maybe not today. Maybe I exaggerated on that bit. Maybe it happened recently. The police got involved, and they dug deeper. And there was no evidence of crosses being burnt in Prince George, or anywhere in Canada. So she exaggerated. She was trying to make a point, but she went the wrong way with it. Now this thing here, this part here, is telling us to exaggerate. What I found out, what it really meant is that when you are telling a persuasive story, you are part of the message. I'm delivering a persuasive message right now. I'm trying to convince you all to put persuasive speaking into your repertoire of speaking skills. Now when it says to exaggerate, they talk about your hand gestures, your vocal variety, moving around appropriately, so exaggerating your movement. This is a fairly small room, so I'm not the greatest person with gestures. My gestures tend to be tight. Now this entire room was opened up, with the walls open, and the stage was somewhat down there wider, or if the whole room was open up and the stage was here on this side, my gestures would have to be quite a bit wider, because I'd be speaking to this end of the room, and I'd be speaking to that end of the room. So when we're talking about exaggerating, as you're part of your message, you have to deliver it with a physical component to it. We talked about this before under the ethos, is showing passion. If you're not passionate about your topic that you're trying to persuade somebody about, maybe you're not the person that should be doing it. Maybe somebody else should be doing it. Or maybe it's not even a topic that's worthwhile being promoted. As in websites, if you're a website developer, so I've said over and over again, for search engine optimization, content is king. The same thing happens for a persuasive message. If you're trying to convince somebody to do something, you need to give them all the information that you can come up with, not to bombard them, but to help them make the decision to be persuaded, to follow the actions that you want to take. So next part we're going to move into is top P's of powerful persuasion. A little bit of a tongue twister. Now these aren't in any specific order, so they're number 1 through 10, but they're not in any specific order. So purpose. There are 4 main purposes of any oral presentation. 1 is to entertain, 2 is to educate, 3 is to inform, and 4 is to persuade. Any presentation or verbal production that you hear is based on those. They're either trying to entertain you. Now, in most cases, whether you're trying to inform, educate, or persuade, all 4 of those purposes should be included in it. If you're giving a persuasive speech, persuasive presentation, trying to motivate somebody, you should be educational, because odds are they may not even have heard of the topic that you're trying to persuade them on. So you have to educate them. You have to inform them. Informing is a little different than educating, because educating is you're giving facts. Informing is you're showing them why it's important. And of course, the persuasive, that's obvious. At any presentation, if you're doing an educational, you should be motivating people at the end, persuading to take a course of action. So that's the purpose. Your presentation should have a purpose. We're revisiting passion again. You want to resonate with your audience. You want to be able to share the passion. You want them to see that you are enthusiastic about your subject, that they will be enthusiastic too, and with the idea is that they are going to follow through and take the course of action that you're recommending to them. Now position. Positioning, once again I'll refer back to that example of the fellow that was the PhD in geography talking about fluoride. If he was the guest speaker here and they introduced him that way, people are going to go, well, why is this guy talking to us? He wasn't positioned properly. However, if it was an open forum on the subject of saying fluoride is good or bad, they brought people in, and there was a nutritionist, a dietitian, perhaps a dentist, all people that had experience with the subject of fluoride, and they had credibility, then it would be appropriate those speakers were positioned. So you, as a speaker, trying to persuade somebody, you set it up from the beginning by, well, as an example, for me coming here to speak to your group. There was a little bit of a bio that I created. I'm really into self-promotion right now, so I'm really into creating that bio. So that sets up the credibility a little bit. So when it came out, there was an introduction that I wrote, and again too, that has set me up as the speaker. So in this case, positioning is you want to set yourself up as the person to talk about this particular or subject. Now packaging. TV, radio, magazines, when you look at advertising, there's an awful lot of packaging that goes on. Using a car as an example, they're selling a high-end automobile. They just don't show it in somebody's driveway in Rutland. They'll show it as at an exotic location or on top of a mountaintop. You want to get there by helicopter. How that ties into a car being on top of a mountaintop, I have no idea. But that's packaging. You're getting that image that it's elite. The same thing applies to us as speakers trying to persuade somebody. Packaging is important. So part of the packaging was the bio, the introduction. That all sets it up. That's all packaging. Now, I knew I was coming to a group of professionals today. I expected the attire to be business casual, which it pretty well is. I've got a tuxedo. I could have wore a tuxedo today, but it wouldn't really have been appropriate because it wouldn't have been packaged properly. It would have been overdressed. I tossed and turned, or I hummed and hawed about wearing a tie. I think, how casual do I want to go? But I decided to go with the full deal, full deal package. So that's part of the packaging. Peak. Peak means grabbing somebody's interest. And we're all familiar with this one. Think back to, you're watching television and you're starting to cross your legs because your bladder's getting full. You're just waiting for that commercial to come. And the old days, they used to put a little wait dot in the corner telling you the commercial is coming up. So you're counting. You're waiting for that commercial to come up. Just when you're ready to run, they throw something on there that grabs your attention right away. Oh no, you're going to have to wait. You can't leave the commercial because you'll miss it. So you stay and you watch and you missed your break. So you got to miss something because you got to get up to the bathroom. That was the days before we had PVRs. Nowadays you record everything and you just fast forward. You don't even look at the commercials, or you take a break when you want. But the idea is to pique your audience's interest. You're going to try and persuade them for something. The expression is often used, don't judge a book by its cover. You heard that one? But people do it all the time. They do it for speakers. They do it for books. They do it for presentations. You only have some 30 seconds to be able to grab your audience's attention. You want to pique their attention. You got to pretty quickly answer these questions. You got to answer the what's in it for me. Every audience member is thinking, why should I be sitting here listening to this speaker? So what's in it for me? So you want to grab their interest from the get-go. You're trying to persuade somebody. You've usually got a solution. And you're going to make a promise. My promise for this session is if you put some of these techniques in play, I promise that you'll have a better luck with persuading people to do the things that you want to, even putting something in practice. I promise you that. That's a promise. Whenever you listen to advertising, there's usually almost always a promise. You see the advertisement, the direct marketing on television. You buy this right now, operators are standing by, but wait, if you order right now in the next 5 minutes, we'll not only send you 2, we'll send you 5 more of these, and the operator's got nothing to do standing by. So that's a promise that they'll send you more. Now this, first off, it looks like a typo. Promise and premise are a little bit different. A promise is where we just said, you make a promise to somebody that you will do something. The premise is that if they follow the promise this way, this is the results that they get. So the promise for me would be, okay, if you take some of the steps that we've learned here, we've talked about, and put them into practice, trying some of them in your presentations, and you take a look at if they work, and you adjust them for the next time, you will be more successful. You may not be perfect your first time, but the premise is that if you practice these skills, get out there and use them, you will have more luck being persuasive. That's the premise. So if you do this, this will result. This is a bit of a review point from the earlier one of logos, where you come up with your logical points. So every persuasive argument, you need to have your series of points, the points that you want to make to win people's favor. You also have to be prepared for the argument. As I said, not everybody's going to agree with your points. They may have their own counter argument. If you're trying to persuade somebody to do something, you need to have an argument well, I've tried, I tried this before and it didn't work. So you need to have a response expecting that, thinking, okay, that's a fair enough question. I have seen that. What somebody tried was this, or this is the solution that worked in that case before. Or maybe we can talk about that after. But you need to have both sides. You need to be prepared to argue your points. Pictures. You ever try finding a graphic that illustrates pictures? I wasn't able to find one. That's supposed to be a picture, a graphic of a picture. Your presentation, you are trying to persuade somebody to do something. So you are, in essence, painting a picture with your words. That's one side of things. The words that you choose in your presentation should have a significance or should have value, not wasting words. The language you should use should be appropriate for the group that you're speaking to. Every group, every professional group has its own lingo. So the words you use should be specific to that profession and not to some other group. Not using acronyms that don't make any sense to other groups. So you need to paint a picture of what it is, the action that you want people to take. The same thing, nowadays, if you're going to be doing a presentation, the expectation is that you will have some kind of a visual presentation, whether it be PowerPoint or Prezi, or there's some other versions, alternative versions out there. But the expectation is that you are going to have something. Speaking of which, a little late now, but I'll pass these out. Forgot to do that. That was a no-no. Yeah, that was a no-no moment. Supposed to be what I'm passing out was a handout that I should have done earlier in the beginning to help work your way through this presentation. So the idea with pictures is that you're providing audio visuals, you're providing handouts, you're providing any supporting material that you can use to promote your argument. The flip side of that is that there's something called death by PowerPoint. Anybody ever heard of that? Death by PowerPoint. I mean, you had instructors in school that wrote every single word on a PowerPoint slide. Didn't say anything. I've tried to keep the words down to a minimal in this presentation. That would take away. If people are spending all the time reading the points on there and not listening to you, they don't need you. So you want to keep it simple, one message at a time. Provocation, the 10th one, the 10th P, persuasive speaking. You're trying to get people to take an action. You're trying to provoke them into doing something. When you think of any commercial and advertisement you hear on the radio or see on television, the final call for action is to get you to do something. Call now, send your money, contact us, visit our website. If you're trying to persuade somebody, this is the point that you want to make your pitch. The action that you want them to take. So far we've been talking about just some background stuff. But as I said, what I realized, I could easily do a 2-3 day workshop on the subject of persuading. I've talked about giving you some ideas, things to keep in mind. So how do you actually become an expert at persuading? Any ideas? How do you become an expert at persuading?
Practice.
Practice. Where do you practice?
Anywhere.
Anywhere. Almost anywhere. Here's the setup. Somebody asked me before if I was familiar with, Brian asked me if I was familiar with Toastmasters at all. Here's how you can practice. Anybody ever heard of Toastmasters? Show of hands. Okay, almost everybody's heard of Toastmasters. Okay, next question. What do you know about Toastmasters? What is it? What do they do? They make leaders. That's a cheating. What do they do? Practice speaking? That's what. Has everybody heard that? I joined Toastmasters some 22 years ago because I was absolutely terrified of public speaking. At that time, I was having literally panic attacks. I do a presentation on the fear and anxiety that people have as public speaking. And at that time, what kept me from public speaking was a major panic attack. You know, anybody ever had a panic attack? Anybody can relate to it? Okay, people that have it have felt that their life is passing before them. They think they're going to die. Heart's pounding. Well, that's one of the minor ones. I had to give a speech. And I knew that speech backward and forward. I can even remember it now. It was May 13th, 1978. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There was twice the amount of people here. There was 50 or 60 people there. And they were hanging on every word that I had to deliver. I had to deliver a speech. And they're waiting for me to deliver that speech. It was only a 2-word speech. All I had to say was, I will. Anybody married here? The married people will appreciate it. Those are your wedding vows. If you're single, you'll have that in the future. It can be very stressful. My life passed before me, and I had lived with my girlfriend at the time for 3 years, so I knew that I was getting to. There was no real reason. But where other people's life passed before them, I knew that I was going to die. But besides my heart pounding, I started laughing. Now, not a giggle, not a chuckle, not a guffaw, but complete body contortions. Completely out of control. Major panic attack. The minister, I think he must have been a basketball coach or a football coach, stopped the wedding. He called a timeout. And he pulled me over to the side, and we had the, see the sports huddle. Coach comes over, puts his arm around me. He says, Ray, he says, I don't know why you're so nervous about this. He says, you get 500 of these things under your belt, and they're no big deal. So he threw me back into the game. I got married. I think we're at about 38 years now. I've kind of lost count. Happily married, 38 years, 37 for her, one for me. But that's another whole other story. But I think what I take that is that's somewhat the secret to becoming a proficient public speaker. Not getting married 500 times, of course, but getting up there and taking on challenges. So how do you become a persuasive speaker? You don't learn public speaking by osmosis. You have to break what I call one of the strongest forces in the world. Your engineers, maybe not, maybe you haven't even heard of this. Strongest force in the world. Bum glue. You heard of bum glue? Bum glue is what glues your butt to the chair that prevents you from standing up and speaking in public. If you can break that force of nature and get up and start speaking, that's when you become a stronger individual. That's where you start developing your public speaking skills. And I think it was the 2000 World Champion of Public Speaking, Darren McCrory, says the secret to becoming an excellent public speaker is stage time, stage time, stage time. And this is really where a Toastmasters club comes into play. Now, who actually lives out of town here? There's a few from out of town. Okay, so most of you are in town. Now, Toastmasters, about 3 years, when I first joined, I'm having my time here. Okay. When I first joined Toastmasters 21 years ago, I got into it because I was terrified of public speaking. I was involved in many leadership positions up until that point. But what I found out was that to be a leader, you had to be a communicator. And while I could get the job easy enough, the position, because nobody else wanted it, taking it to the next level was difficult because I was terrified of public speaking. I was shy. So that was limiting me. The only way to do that was to develop my public speaking skills. And what I found out was to be a leader, you needed to be a communicator. The better communicator you became, more leadership opportunities presented themselves. So I joined Toastmasters on somebody's advice to practice my public speaking skills, because that's what it was about at the time. But what I learned was, it really wasn't about public speaking, it was about developing your self-confidence. At that time I had an expression that I used, and some of you might recognize it from Conan the Barbarian. That what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That was the mindset I was at the time. But after a while in the Toastmaster program, I changed my mind, and I changed it to that which challenges you makes you stronger. So once I engaged in the program, going on a regular basis, I was scared in the beginning. I started taking on different speeches. And probably one of the first speeches you do is an icebreaker speech where you introduce yourself to the group. It's a short speech. It's called the icebreaker. You're breaking the ice. I think I went 10 months before doing it because I was terrified. But once I got that ice broken, I continued to deliver speeches and still remain active in the club. Now in Kelowna, this is my particular club, Kelowna Flying Solo Toastmasters. I've been a member of that club going on 16, 17 years, and the backbone of it probably about the last 5 or 10 years. Toastmasters has become a major portion of my life. While I started off as public speaking, as my self-confidence developed, I started taking on more opportunities. And I found out that sometimes opportunities are disguised as hard work. I took these opportunities on, and I took on more challenging roles in public speaking. At the same time, I started taking on leadership roles. Back about 4 years ago, Toastmasters changed the branding to where leaders are made. They did some polling and research into corporate America, and they found out that there is a shortage of leaders in corporate America, so that would include Canada too. Shortage of leaders. And Toastmasters is rebranding themselves, trying to become the world's leading provider of inexpensive communication and leadership training. I've known hundreds and hundreds of people go through the program. I've seen shy people. I've seen people that one fellow that he joined our club. He was giving his icebreaker speech. He was crying. He had to sit down because he was so terrified. Now he wants to be a motivational speaker. After a year, he's doing that. I heard a story about a fellow that was giving his icebreaker speech. Big guy, passed out, dropped right to the floor. Got up the second time, did it, dropped right to the floor. So what they did was they got 2 big burly fellows to hold him up. He got that icebreaker out of the way. Within that short period of time, we have contests, and he won at his club contest, he won at his area, he won at his division. He became a district winner. If he hadn't had somebody literally support him physically, he wouldn't have had that. He would have let his fear of public speaking control him. And this is really what happens at a Toastmasters club. My club, Tuesday night, Flying Solo Rotary Center for the Arts. You're all welcome to visit. Guests are always welcome. There's people at different levels. We've had 4 or 5 people join in this past week, so they're all brand new. We have experienced people. You learn public speaking. You learn persuasive speeches. One of the speeches that the fellow gave the other night that I passed out early was called persuasive speaking. And he was talking about a lesson he learned early in life. And he's trying to persuade us not to make the mistakes that he did. Any questions about Toastmasters? Or any questions about this? Do you know all the answers? So, no questions with that. I invite you to come out to Flying Solo. There are other Toastmaster clubs that might work for you for time of day. There's a breakfast club first thing in the morning. On Thursdays, I believe it is, downtown. There's a couple of noontime clubs that meet twice a month. There's also a Monday night community club and a Tuesday night community club. That's my presentation. Go out, persuade people. Thanks for inviting me in to speak to you.